In March 1897, a physician's report submitted to the Journal of Heredity documented a family in rural Kentucky whose existence defied medical understanding. The mother stood barely 4 feet tall. The father weighed over 500 pounds. Between them, they had 12 children, and according to hospital records preserved in the Louisville Medical Archives, not one of them was born without severe physical abnormalities. Before we dive into the story, if you're fascinated by real medical mysteries that challenged everything doctors thought they knew, then you're in the right place. This story explores the kind of case that once made early physicians question everything they thought they knew about heredity. Click the like button and subscribe to the channel. And I want to know who's here with us. Where are you watching from, and what time is it? Now, let's continue with the story. Dr. Samuel Garrett had practiced medicine in Harlan County, Kentucky, for nearly 15 years when a farmer appeared at his office on a cold morning in March 1897. The man was visibly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot as he described a family living in the hollow beyond Pine Mountain. According to the farmer, something was profoundly wrong with every child in that household. Garrett had heard whispers about the family before, dismissed them as rural superstition, but the farmer's insistence carried enough weight to warrant investigation. The journey took most of a day. Garrett's horse struggled along narrow paths carved into mountainside, through dense stands of oak and hickory that blocked out the afternoon sun. When he finally reached the homestead, what he found stopped him cold. The dwelling itself was crude but maintained, smoke curling from a stone chimney. But it was the woman who emerged to greet him that first seized his attention. She stood no higher than a child of 8 or 9 years, her proportions those of an adult, compressed into a frame that seemed biologically impossible. Inside, the doctor encountered her husband. The man occupied a reinforced chair near the fireplace, his body sprawling across a space meant for 3 normal-sized adults. Garrett estimated his weight at well over 500 pounds, noting the labored breathing, the swollen joints, the skin stretched taut across impossible dimensions. Around them moved children of various ages, and each one bore visible marks of developmental catastrophe. The eldest girl, perhaps 14, walked with a severe spinal curvature that twisted her torso nearly sideways. 2 boys, twins by their identical features, shared clubbed feet so extreme they moved by dragging themselves across the floor. A younger child possessed hands with fingers fused together into paddle-like appendages. Another had a cranium misshapen, to the point that Garrett questioned how the brain within could function at all. Yet function it did. The children spoke, performed chores, displayed awareness and personality, despite their profound physical limitations. Garrett spent 3 hours conducting examinations with the parents' permission, filling his notebook with observations that grew increasingly disturbing. Every child displayed multiple abnormalities. Some had skeletal malformations, combined with organ displacement, that his training told him should be incompatible with life. Others showed signs of conditions he had only read about in the most obscure medical texts. The parents themselves, while cooperative, seemed resigned to their circumstances, as if they had long ago accepted that their offspring would never be normal. As darkness fell, and Garrett prepared to leave, the mother asked a question that would haunt him for years. Could medicine explain why God had cursed them so? The doctor had no answer. He had witnessed many things in his career, but nothing had prepared him for a family where genetic catastrophe appeared to be not the exception, but the absolute rule. Dr. Garrett returned to his office, obsessed with understanding how such a union had come to exist. Over the following weeks, He conducted interviews with the parents separately, extracting histories that read like case studies in medical impossibility. The mother, whom he recorded in his notes as Sarah Pennington, had been born in Cincinnati, Ohio, in 1871. Hospital records from Children's Hospital of Cincinnati, which Garrett later obtained through correspondence, documented her diagnosis at age 3, primordial dwarfism, a condition so rare that fewer than 24 cases had been recorded in American medical literature at that time. Sarah's childhood medical file painted a picture of relentless examination. Physicians had measured every aspect of her development, noting that while her mental faculties appeared normal, her body refused to grow beyond the proportions of a small child. By age 12, she had reached her final height of 3 feet 11 inches. The records also revealed something darker. Her family, unable to cope with the curiosity and cruelty their daughter attracted, had effectively abandoned her to the care of a religious charity organization when she turned 15. The charity, based in Louisville, Kentucky, operated a home for individuals deemed unmarriageable or unable to support themselves. It was there, in 1888, that Sarah met the man who would become her husband. His name, according to county marriage records, was Benjamin Caldwell, and his own medical history proved equally extraordinary. Benjamin had been born in 1865 to a farming family in Breathitt County, Kentucky. For the first 12 years of his life, he appeared entirely normal. Then, something in his body went catastrophically wrong. His mother's diary, which Garrett later discovered through the family, described the transformation with mounting horror. Benjamin began eating enormous quantities of food, but never felt satisfied. His weight doubled within a year, then doubled again. By age 16, he weighed 300 pounds. By 20, he exceeded 400. A physician in Lexington examined him in 1887 and diagnosed what he termed a pituitary dysfunction, though the medical understanding of such conditions remained primitive. The doctor's report, preserved in the Kentucky Medical Society archives, noted that Benjamin's body seemed incapable of regulating its own growth signals. His appetite was insatiable, his metabolism broken, his skeletal structure struggling to support the accumulating mass. Benjamin's family had tried everything: restricted diets that left him writhing in hunger, herbal remedies from local healers, even a brutal regimen of forced physical labor that only exhausted him without reducing his weight. By 1888, his father made a devastating decision. Unable to care for a son who consumed resources meant for 6 people and could no longer perform farm work, he arranged for Benjamin's placement in the same Louisville charity home that housed Sarah. The two outcasts found each other in that grim institution. Sarah saw beyond Benjamin's grotesque size to the gentle man trapped within. Benjamin, for his first time in years, encountered someone who did not recoil from his presence. The charity administrators, perhaps relieved to reduce their burden, permitted the marriage in 1889. The couple left Louisville with donated supplies and made their way to the most remote hollow they could find in Harlan County, where Benjamin's distant cousins reluctantly allowed them to build a cabin on unused land. What Garrett found most troubling in his research was not the individual conditions, but their convergence. Both parents carried genetic abnormalities so severe they had made normal life impossible. Both had been cast out by families overwhelmed by their needs. Both had retreated to the mountains where society's judgment could not reach them. And both, through either ignorance or desperation, or simply human need for family, had chosen to have children. The medical literature of 1897 offered no guidance for such a scenario. Heredity remained a poorly understood science. Gregor Mendel's work on genetic inheritance published decades earlier, had been largely ignored by the medical establishment. No one could predict what might happen when two people carrying such extreme genetic burdens attempted to create life together. Sarah and Benjamin had unknowingly embodied the kind of tragic experiment nature itself sometimes conducts, one that medicine could only try to understand. As Garrett closed his notebook after documenting their histories, he understood that what he was witnessing might be unprecedented in medical science. The question that tormented him was simple. Had anyone thought to warn them what might happen? And if they had known, would they have chosen differently? Sarah discovered she was pregnant in the spring of 1890. The local midwife, Martha Combs, recorded the event in her detailed logbook, now preserved in the Harlan County Historical Society. What began as cautious optimism transformed into dread as the pregnancy progressed. Sarah's already tiny frame struggled to accommodate the growing child. By her 6th month, she could barely walk. Benjamin, himself largely immobile, could offer little physical assistance. The birth in January 1891 nearly killed her. Martha's notes described a labor lasting 36 hours, complicated by Sarah's narrow pelvis and the infant's unusual presentation. When the boy finally emerged, Martha's practiced hands detected the problem immediately. His feet curved inward so severely that the soles faced each other. The ankle bones twisted at angles nature never intended. The condition, known as talipes equinovarus, was severe enough that Martha doubted the child would ever walk normally. They named him James. Despite his deformed feet, he nursed and grew. Sarah wept with relief that he lived, choosing to see survival as blessing enough. But when she became pregnant again barely 6 months later, Martha voiced concerns that Sarah dismissed. The second child, a girl born in May 1892, arrived with similar clubbed feet, plus something new. Her spine curved unnaturally to the left, creating a hump between her shoulder blades that worsened as she aged. Word began spreading through the isolated communities dotting those mountains. Families who had initially shown neighborly kindness grew distant. When Sarah gave birth to twin boys in March 1893, and both emerged with cranial malformations that left their skulls misshapen and foreheads grotesquely prominent, the whispers turned to open judgment. One woman told Martha that God was punishing unnatural unions, that people like Sarah and Benjamin should never have been allowed to marry. Martha's logbook entries grew increasingly clinical, as if emotional distance might protect her from what she was witnessing. The twins, whom the parents named David and Daniel, displayed matching abnormalities: oversized heads, eyes set too far apart, cognitive development that lagged months behind normal infants. Yet they too survived, adding their cries to the increasingly chaotic household. The 4th pregnancy terrified Martha. She urged Sarah to stop, explaining in terms as gentle as she could manage that each birth brought worse afflictions. Sarah refused to discuss it. Whether from religious conviction, denial, or simply acceptance of circumstances beyond her control, she carried the child to term. The girl, born in November 1894, had hands unlike anything Martha had documented before. The fingers had failed to separate properly during development, leaving paddle-like appendages with only slight indentations where individual digits should have been. By this point, neighboring families had stopped visiting entirely. Children were forbidden from approaching the Caldwell property, with parents warning that whatever curse afflicted that family might somehow spread. The general store owner in the nearest settlement began refusing to extend credit, forcing Benjamin's cousins to make supply runs on the family's behalf. The isolation became nearly absolute. Martha continued attending the births, driven by professional obligation and perhaps a grim fascination with documenting what medical science had never seen. Her notes from this period reveal internal conflict. She described feeling complicit in ongoing tragedy, yet also recognized that without her assistance, both mothers and infants would likely die. The moral weight of enabling these pregnancies while watching each child emerge more damaged than the last clearly tormented her. What the logbook makes devastatingly clear is that by 1895, everyone involved understood the pattern. Each pregnancy produced a child with severe abnormalities. Each birth compounded the family's isolation. Each new infant represented both a life saved and a future circumscribed by physical limitations that would never improve. Yet Sarah and Benjamin continued, whether from lack of knowledge about preventing conception, religious prohibition against such prevention, or the very human desire to create family despite impossible odds. The first 4 children had established a horrifying precedent. The medical record would show that they were only the beginning. Dr. Garrett's initial visit in March 1897 had been prompted by rumor. But what transformed his curiosity into obsession was a letter he received 3 weeks later from Martha Combs. The midwife, burdened by years of silent witness, had finally sought outside guidance. Her correspondence described not 4 children but 8, with 4 more births having occurred between 1895 and 1896. While Garrett remained ignorant of the family's existence. He returned to the Hollow in early April, this time prepared with measurement instruments, photographic equipment borrowed from a colleague, and a determination to document everything with scientific precision. What he found exceeded even his expanded expectations. The 4 additional children displayed conditions that pushed the boundaries of medical possibility. One boy, age 2, possessed organs arranged in mirror image to normal human anatomy, a condition called situs inversus that Garrett had only read about in European medical journals. Another child had vertebrae so malformed that her neck could not support her head without assistance. Garrett spent a week conducting examinations, filling 3 notebooks with observations. He measured skull circumferences, documented skeletal abnormalities, tested reflexes and cognitive responses. The parents cooperated fully, perhaps hoping that medical attention might somehow help. Their children, Benjamin in particular, seemed desperate for answers, asking repeatedly if doctors in cities might have treatments or explanations. The physician's excitement at documenting such an unprecedented case warred with his growing ethical discomfort. These were not laboratory specimens, but suffering human beings, trapped in bodies that betrayed them daily. Yet the scientific value seemed undeniable. He drafted a detailed report and sent copies to 3 prominent researchers: Dr. William Osler at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Charles Davenport at Harvard, and Dr. Horatio Wood in Philadelphia, all men known for their work in heredity and developmental abnormalities. The responses, when they arrived months later, proved bitterly disappointing. Osler's reply was polite but dismissive, suggesting that Garrett had likely exaggerated the severity of conditions or been deceived by the parents about blood relations. Davenport's response carried undertones of accusation, implying that a country doctor lacked the training to accurately diagnose such complex conditions. Only Wood showed genuine interest, though his letter raised disturbing questions about whether the parents might be more closely related than they claimed, suggesting consanguinity as the only logical explanation for such catastrophic results. Garrett fired back correspondence, defending his observations and providing additional documentation. He sent photographs, though the primitive equipment captured only crude images. He included measurements, timeline charts, and copies of Martha's birth records. He emphasized that neither parent showed any indication of shared ancestry, that their backgrounds traced to completely different regions, and that their individual conditions alone might explain the hereditary disaster playing out in their children. The scientific establishment's skepticism stung, but Garrett refused to abandon his investigation. He began researching every medical text he could obtain through interlibrary exchanges, searching for similar cases in recorded history. What he found were scattered references to individual conditions, never to a family where multiple severe abnormalities appeared across every single child. The medical literature offered no framework for understanding what he was witnessing. By autumn 1895, before Garrett's involvement, Sarah had given birth to a fifth child, with a cleft palate so severe that feeding required constant intervention. The sixth child, born in early 1896, had limb development so disrupted that one arm terminated at the elbow while the corresponding leg extended only to mid-thigh. Each new birth seemed to introduce novel catastrophes, as if the parent's genetic material was combining in endlessly creative patterns of malformation. By the winter of 1895, after the birth of their fifth child, Sarah had grown desperate. The midwife, Martha Combs, noted that both parents began taking advice from a neighbor named Elias Burke, a recluse who claimed to have studied old mountain remedies passed down from his grandfather, a man who, he said, helped fix children born wrong. Burke insisted their affliction was not of blood, but of blocked vitality, something that could be corrected through an alignment of humors. He sold Benjamin a crude tonic made from crushed lead filings, foxglove leaves, and alcohol, promising it would thin the heavy blood and make their next child whole. Benjamin, too trusting and too desperate, took it daily for weeks. Sarah, though hesitant, began taking her own dose mixed with molasses after Elias's wife swore it had restored fertility to barren women in her family. The tonics burned their throats, caused violent sickness, but they believed suffering was a necessary cleansing. When the sixth child was born the following spring, his left arm ended abruptly at the elbow, and the right leg twisted backward at the knee. The deformities were worse than anything Martha had seen. Her journal entry from that night was brief and almost cryptic. They sought healing from what poisons the earth itself, and the earth answered. Garrett later discovered remnants of the tonic in the Caldwell cabin, the bottle labeled B & Sons Pharmaco Remedies, Lexington, its ingredients long outlawed by the turn of the century. Modern analysis decades later would reveal its contents: lead acetate and foxglove extract, both capable of causing congenital malformations in utero. It was one more tragedy born not of cruelty, but of naive hope. Two outcasts clinging to superstition in a world that had already abandoned them. Garrett's frustration peaked when he realized that academic medicine would not take his findings seriously without direct examination. He needed someone with institutional authority to witness what he had documented. In December 1896, he wrote directly to Dr. Llewellyn Barker, a rising researcher at Johns Hopkins, known for challenging conventional medical thinking. This letter took a different approach. Garrett acknowledged the case sounded impossible, admitted it challenged everything he had learned in medical school, and issued a direct challenge. "Come see for yourself," he wrote, "or forever wonder if you dismissed the most important hereditary case study of the century." 3 months later, Barker's telegram arrived. He was coming to Kentucky, and he was bringing a team. While Garrett awaited the Hopkins team's arrival, Sarah gave birth to her 9th child in February 1897. The timing was cruelly perfect. The infant boy emerged with what the medical team would later document as multiple organ displacement. His heart positioned partially on the right side of his chest, his liver occupying space where the stomach should reside, intestines coiled in reverse of normal anatomy. Martha's hands trembled as she cleaned the newborn, recognizing that the internal chaos she could not see must be even worse than the external signs suggested. The child survived his first week, then his first month, defying every expectation. Yet feeding him required elaborate positioning to prevent aspiration, and he vomited frequently as his malformed digestive system struggled with basic function. Sarah, exhausted from 9 pregnancies in 7 years, had little milk to offer. The older children, particularly the 14-year-old daughter, whose twisted spine had worsened considerably, helped care for their youngest sibling with a competence born of grim necessity. Hospital records from the town of Harlan, obtained through Garrett's persistent requests, documented 3 emergency visits between 1894 and 1896. The 7th child, a girl born in autumn 1895, had experienced seizures so severe that Benjamin's cousins had transported the family the grueling 12 miles to town. The attending physician's notes described a child with clear developmental delays, limited verbal ability, and a skull that showed premature fusion of cranial sutures, forcing the brain to grow against unyielding bone. The 8th child's case file revealed something even more disturbing. Born in June 1896, the boy had arrived missing his left kidney entirely, with the right kidney enlarged to compensate, but functioning poorly. He also displayed what doctors termed syndactyly in all 4 limbs. Fingers and toes webbed together in patterns that eliminated individual digit function. The Harlan physician had recommended institutionalization, suggesting that the child's medical needs exceeded what any family could manage in isolated mountain conditions. Sarah had refused. The records included her statement, transcribed by a nurse. She would not send her children away to die alone among strangers. The physician's frustration was evident in his marginal notes, where he questioned whether allowing these children to remain in such primitive conditions constituted a form of parental neglect, regardless of intention. Daily survival for the family had become a complex choreography of care. The oldest children who could walk attended to those who could not. Benjamin, largely confined to his reinforced chair, served as a stationary anchor point around which the household revolved. He held infants while Sarah prepared what meager food their limited resources provided. He listened to the verbal children practice their letters, having taught himself to read during his years in the Louisville Charity Home. Despite his immobility, he functioned as the family's emotional center, his gentle nature creating a refuge against the hostility of the outside world. Financial survival depended entirely on charity from Benjamin's cousins and occasional work the oldest boy could perform for neighboring farms, though his clubbed feet made physical labor agonizing. The family raised a small garden, kept chickens that the children could tend, and stretched every resource to its absolute limit. Medical care beyond Martha's midwifery remained impossible to afford. When the 7th child's seizures struck, the cost of that single hospital visit had taken 6 months to repay. The isolation that had begun as geographic necessity had become absolute social quarantine. No neighbors visited. No children from other families played with the Caldwell offspring. Church attendance, attempted once in 1894, had ended when the family's arrival caused such discomfort that the preacher privately asked them not to return. The rejection was framed as concern for Sarah's difficulty traveling, but everyone understood the real reason. By the time Dr. Barker's telegram arrived in March 1897, the family consisted of Sarah, Benjamin, and 9 living children ranging from 6 years to 2 months old. Each child bore multiple physical abnormalities. Each required specialized care that strained the family's capacity beyond any reasonable limit. Each represented a life that medical science insisted should not exist, yet somehow did. The question that haunted Garrett as he prepared for the Hopkins team's arrival was not whether these children's conditions could be explained, but whether anyone would believe the explanation once it was offered. Dr. Llewellys Barker arrived in Harlan County on April 23, 1897, accompanied by 2 colleagues, a geneticist named Dr. Harold Fenton, and a medical photographer with equipment far superior to anything Garrett possessed. Their journey from Baltimore had taken 5 days, and Barker's private correspondence, preserved in the Johns Hopkins Medical Archives, reveals that he expected to debunk what he termed another example of rural medical hysteria. The first examination shattered that expectation within minutes. Barker's clinical notes, written in the precise language of academic medicine, document his shock at finding Garrett's descriptions, if anything, understated. He began with the parents, confirming Sarah's primordial dwarfism through careful measurement and noting that Benjamin's weight had increased to approximately 530 pounds. The pituitary dysfunction was obvious even without sophisticated testing. Benjamin's facial features showed the characteristic coarsening. His hands were grotesquely enlarged, and his breathing labored from the sheer mass pressing on his lungs. Then, Barker examined the children. His methodology was systematic, starting with the oldest and working downward by age. The photographic record he created, though disturbing, provided unprecedented documentation of hereditary catastrophe. Each child was measured, tested for reflexes and cognitive function, and assessed for internal abnormalities through the crude diagnostic tools available in 1897. Fenton took detailed family histories, searching for any overlooked connection between the parents' bloodlines that might explain consanguinity. What emerged from 3 days of intensive examination was a conclusion that defied contemporary genetic theory. The parents shared no common ancestry, traceable through 4 generations on either side. Their individual conditions, while severe, were entirely separate in origin and mechanism. Yet their children displayed a bewildering array of malformations that suggested something far more complex than simple inheritance of parental traits. Barker's hypothesis, outlined in notes he shared with Fenton, proposed that each parent carried multiple recessive genetic factors beyond their obvious conditions. When combined through reproduction, these hidden factors expressed themselves in catastrophic ways. The theory was remarkably close to Mendelian genetics, though Barker had not yet encountered Mendel's work, which remained obscure in American medical circles. He was essentially rediscovering principles of heredity through direct observation of their most extreme manifestation. The team documented specific patterns. Several children showed skeletal malformations similar in type, but varying in severity, suggesting a shared underlying genetic defect expressing differently. The organ displacement appeared in 3 separate children, always involving the same systems, but in unique configurations. Most troubling was the cognitive assessment. While some children demonstrated normal or near-normal mental function despite their physical limitations, others showed profound developmental delays that Fenton believed indicated brain malformation, invisible to external examination. Barker's correspondence with Johns Hopkins during this period reveals his growing conviction that this family represented a scientific opportunity that might never recur. He urged the university to fund a long-term study, proposing regular examinations to track how the children's conditions progressed and whether any treatments might alleviate their suffering. He also raised an uncomfortable question. Should Sarah and Benjamin be counseled against further pregnancies? And did medical professionals have any authority to enforce such counsel? The ethical debate this sparked among the Hopkins team became heated. Fenton argued that preventing future births was a moral imperative, given the suffering each child endured. The photographer, a religious man, insisted that only God held dominion over such decisions. Barker found himself caught between scientific fascination and human compassion, recognizing that every new child provided additional data while also representing another life condemned to physical agony. Before leaving Kentucky, Barker sat with Benjamin and Sarah, explaining as gently as possible what his examination had revealed. Their children's conditions stemmed from the unfortunate combination of genetic factors both parents carried. Each pregnancy was in effect a genetic lottery with impossibly bad odds. Benjamin asked the question that had haunted him for years. Was there any chance a future child might be born healthy? Barker's answer, documented in his notes, was devastatingly honest. Based on the pattern across 9 births, the statistical probability approached 0. Every child they conceived would almost certainly suffer similar or worse abnormalities. Sarah's response was silence. She did not weep or protest. She simply nodded, as if Barker had confirmed something she had long suspected, but never wanted to acknowledge. 3 months later, she discovered she was pregnant with her 10th child. The 10th child arrived in February 1898, a girl whose condition represented a new threshold of medical impossibility. Martha's birth records describe a labor complicated by the infant's failure to breathe independently for the first 12 minutes of life. When respiration finally began, it remained shallow and irregular. The child had been born with a cleft palate that extended through the soft tissue into the nasal cavity, but examination revealed something far worse. Her chest wall had developed incompletely, leaving portions of her lungs partially exposed beneath translucent skin. Garrett, who attended the birth alongside Martha, immediately sent word to Barker. The Hopkins physician arrived within 2 weeks, accompanied this time by a specialist in pulmonary conditions. Their examination confirmed that the infant's survival defied medical logic. The exposed lung tissue should have led to immediate infection and death, yet somehow the child clung to life, wheezing and struggling, but alive. Barker's photographs from this visit, preserved in medical archives, show an infant whose physical form seemed barely viable, held together by biological processes no one could explain. Sarah became pregnant again, before the 10th child reached 6 months of age. The news reached Garrett through Martha, whose frustration had turned to despair. The midwife's journal entry from July 1898 reads, "I have delivered monsters into this world for 7 years and can no longer pretend I am helping anyone. Each birth adds to suffering that never ends." The 11th pregnancy progressed differently. Sarah, now 37 years old and physically devastated by a decade of childbearing, experienced complications from the start. Severe cramping in her 4th month suggested twins, confirmed when Martha's palpations detected 2 sporate heartbeats. The delivery in January 1899 became the worst Martha would ever record. The twins were born 6 weeks premature, their bodies tiny, even by Sarah's diminished standards. Both boys displayed overlapping catastrophic conditions: spinal bifida, leaving portions of their spinal cords exposed, hearts with malformed chambers that created audible murmurs, and cranial development so disrupted that their skulls appeared soft and pliable where bone should have fused. They shared one additional horror: their digestive systems had developed incompletely, lacking proper connection between stomach and intestines. The first twin died within 18 hours. The second survived 4 days, sustained by Sarah's desperate attempts at nursing, despite the futility. Barker, notified by telegram, arrived too late to examine them living, but performed post-mortem examinations that revealed the full extent of internal chaos. His report to Johns Hopkins, written in clinical language that barely masked his shock, described organs that had formed in approximate but non-functional arrangements, as if the genetic instructions for human development had been scrambled beyond recognition. These were the first deaths among Sarah and Benjamin's children. 9 had survived against impossible odds. These 2 could not. The graves were dug on the property, marked with wooden crosses that Benjamin carved himself. No preacher would come to perform services. The family buried their sons alone. 3 months later, Sarah discovered she was pregnant for the 12th time. Garrett's correspondence with Barker reveals his horror at this news. He had hoped the twin deaths might finally convince the couple to stop, though he acknowledged they likely lacked both the knowledge and means to prevent conception. Barker's response was coldly scientific. One more pregnancy would complete the statistical sample, providing data on a full dozen offspring from this unique genetic combination. The 12th child, a girl born in November 1899, arrived with conditions that combined elements seen in her siblings, but arranged in new configurations. She had the webbed digits of her brother, the spinal curvature of her eldest sister, and developmental delays immediately apparent in her weak muscle tone and inability to focus her eyes. Additionally, her left arm had formed without a hand, terminating in a smooth stub at the wrist. By the century's end, the Caldwell family consisted of 10 living children and 2 buried in mountain soil. Sarah's body, ravaged by 12 pregnancies in 10 years, would bear no more. Whether by biological mercy or simple reproductive exhaustion, her childbearing years had concluded. The family that medical science had documented so thoroughly was now complete, frozen in time as a testament to genetic catastrophe that 19th century medicine could document, but not prevent, explain, but not remedy. Barker's comprehensive report reached the Journal of Heredity in March 1900, accompanied by photographs, measurements, and genealogical charts documenting 3 generations of both parental lines. The response from the medical establishment was immediate and viciously divided. What followed was an 18-month battle that exposed deep fractures in how science approached human suffering. The initial publication in July 1900 sparked outrage from unexpected quarters. Dr. Edmund Sterling, a prominent Boston physician, published a scathing response, arguing that detailed documentation of such cases served no legitimate scientific purpose. His letter to the journal, reprinted in several medical periodicals, claimed that parading human deformity before the medical community degraded both the profession and the unfortunate subjects. He questioned whether the family had truly consented to such invasive examination, or whether their poverty and isolation had made refusal impossible. Barker defended his work in subsequent issues, insisting that understanding hereditary mechanisms required unflinching examination of extreme cases. Without documentation, he argued, medicine would remain trapped in superstition and ignorance. The Caldwell family represented a natural experiment in human genetics that might never be replicated. Refusing to study them would be a betrayal of scientific duty. Then, the eugenics movement discovered the case. Dr. Albert Hendricks, a vocal advocate for selective breeding policies, seized on Barker's findings as proof that certain individuals should be legally prevented from reproducing. His article in the American Journal of Public Health in October 1900 used the Caldwell children as evidence that the state had a responsibility to intervene when genetic unfitness was apparent. Hendricks proposed legislation requiring sterilization of individuals with severe hereditary conditions, citing Sarah and Benjamin as examples of people who should never have been allowed to marry. This appropriation of the research horrified Barker. His private correspondence reveals a man wrestling with unintended consequences. He had sought to advance medical knowledge, not provide ammunition for those advocating governmental control over human reproduction. Yet once published, his findings took on lives beyond his control. Eugenics advocates across America began referencing the Kentucky case as justification for increasingly extreme policies. Dr. Harold Fenton, who had accompanied Barker on the initial examination, broke with his colleague over this issue. In a public letter published in February 1901, Fenton argued that continued study of the family had become exploitation. The children's suffering served no therapeutic purpose, and the documentation had devolved into a grotesque catalog that satisfied curiosity without offering help. He revealed that during their examinations, several children had wept from pain and fear, and that Sarah had asked repeatedly whether the doctors could make her children normal. When told they could not, she had asked why they kept returning. The controversy reached its peak when a Philadelphia newspaper obtained photographs from the case file and published them without permission in April 1901. The images, meant for medical education, appeared alongside sensationalized text describing the family as genetic horrors. Public reaction was swift and cruel. Letters to the editor debated whether such individuals should be isolated from society, with some suggesting the children be removed to institutions for public safety. Garrett, watching from Kentucky, found himself caught between scientific duty and human decency. He had initiated contact with academic medicine, believing it would help the family. Instead, he had exposed them to judgment far beyond anything their isolated mountain community had inflicted. His correspondence with local officials reveals attempts to shield the Caldwells from unwanted attention, but the damage was done. Medical students were requesting permission to visit for educational purposes. Photographers sought access. Even a traveling show promoter inquired about exhibiting the family, offering payment that Sarah and Benjamin desperately needed, but refused with quiet dignity. The debate in medical journals continued through 1902, with no consensus emerging. Some physicians argued the case demonstrated why hereditary research was essential. Others insisted it proved such research was inherently unethical when subjects could not meaningfully consent and received no benefit. The eugenics faction continued citing the family as justification for increasingly draconian policies, while civil liberties advocates warned that medical paternalism threatened fundamental human rights. Lost in the academic warfare were the actual subjects: 10 children growing older with conditions that would never improve, parents aging rapidly under impossible burdens, and a family that had become, against their will, a symbol in debates they barely understood. The question nobody seemed willing to address was the simplest. Now that medicine had documented their existence so thoroughly, what responsibility did science have to actually help them? While medical journals debated ethics and eugenics advocates exploited their existence, the Caldwell family continued the grinding work of daily survival. Records from the Harlan County School Board, discovered in storage decades later, reveal an unexpected development in 1900. A young teacher named Grace Holloway, newly arrived from Lexington, had learned of the family's situation and insisted that those children capable of attending school deserved education. Her diary, donated to the Kentucky Historical Society by her granddaughter in 1973, provides the most intimate portrait of the family beyond clinical observation. Grace's first visit in September 1900 described a household that functioned through carefully orchestrated routines. The oldest daughter, now nearly 14, despite her severe spinal curvature, managed the younger children with surprising competence. James, the eldest son, whose clubbed feet had never straightened, had learned to walk using crudely carved crutches, and he helped his father with tasks requiring mobility. Grace noted that 3 children possessed mental capacity for formal education. James, one of both, the younger girls despite her physical limitations, and surprisingly, one of the twins with cranial malformation, whose cognitive abilities had developed normally despite his appearance. She began visiting twice weekly, bringing primers and teaching materials. Her entries reveal children hungry for knowledge, eager to prove themselves capable of learning, despite bodies that society deemed monstrous. The community's attitude had begun shifting incrementally. Benjamin's cousins, perhaps shamed by academic attention or simply worn down by years of need, convinced several neighboring families to contribute supplies. A local carpenter constructed better furniture adapted to the children's needs, including a specialized chair for the child whose neck could not support her head. These were small mercies, but they represented cracks in the wall of isolation. Grace's diary also documented the family's internal dynamics with an observer's clarity. Sarah, aged beyond her 38 years, maintained iron discipline over household management. She had devised feeding strategies for children with cleft palates and malformed digestive systems, discovered positioning that eased breathing difficulties, and created a schedule that ensured each child received necessary care. Her competence contradicted assumptions that someone of her size and background could not manage such complexity. Benjamin's role surprised Grace most. Despite his immobility, he served as the family's emotional foundation and intellectual guide. He had taught himself considerable knowledge from borrowed books, and he engaged his children in discussions about history, mathematics, and moral philosophy. Grace recorded conversations where Benjamin explained concepts with clarity that rivaled trained educators. His physical imprisonment had forced development of mental resources that might otherwise have remained dormant. The reality Grace documented stood in stark contrast to medical reports that focused solely on pathology. Yes, the children suffered. Yes, their conditions caused constant pain and limitation. But they also laughed, quarreled like normal siblings, showed preferences and personalities, and possessed interior lives rich with hopes despite futures constrained by biology. The girl with webbed hands had taught herself to draw by gripping charcoal between her paddle-like appendages, creating surprisingly detailed sketches. The boy with reversed organs sang constantly, his voice clear and strong, despite the chaos inside his chest. Yet Grace's diary never descended into sentimentality. She recorded the seizures that struck without warning, the infections that threatened lives made fragile by compromised immune systems, and the slow deterioration of conditions that would never improve. She described Sarah's exhaustion on days when 3 children simultaneously needed intensive care, and Benjamin's frustration at being unable to physically help during crises. One entry from December 1900 reveals the family's awareness of their notoriety. James had asked Grace why doctors kept coming to stare at them, but never made them better. She had no good answer. The boy, 12 years old and perceptive beyond his years, told her he understood they were valuable to science, but wondered if science valued them as people. By 1901, 5 children attended Grace's informal lessons regularly. 2 had learned to read at levels appropriate for their ages. 1 showed remarkable aptitude for arithmetic. These achievements would never appear in medical journals, obsessed with cataloging their physical failures. Yet Grace's diary preserved them, a testament that even lives born into genetic catastrophe contained moments of achievement, connection, and thoroughly ordinary human experience that the medical establishment seemed determined to ignore. The document revealed both devastation and unexpected resilience. The children's physical limitations had worsened as predicted, yet 3 had reached developmental milestones that initial assessments suggested impossible. The boy with reversed organs had not only survived, but grown stronger, his body adapting to its unconventional arrangement. Garrett's analysis proposed that while the genetic combination had been catastrophic, certain protective factors must also have been present. Publication in December 1903 sparked measured academic response. The eugenics movement largely ignored this second report. Prominent researchers acknowledged that Garrett and Barker had documented something genuinely unprecedented, though the case raised questions contemporary science lacked tools to answer definitively. Benjamin died in November 1905. His heart, working for years to pump blood through impossible mass, had simply stopped. His death removed the family's emotional foundation and eliminated any possibility of male labor. Sarah, now 44 and physically broken, found herself solely responsible for 8 children whose needs exceeded what any single person could manage. The Harlan County Poor Commission offered removal of the children to a state institution. Sarah's response was absolute refusal. She would not send her children away to die among strangers. The commission arranged minimal financial assistance instead. Dr. Garrett's involvement effectively ended in 1906. His final visit found Sarah maintaining impossible routines through sheer will. Yet his notes also recorded moments that defied overwhelming tragedy. A boy teaching himself to play mouth organ despite webbed fingers. Another child memorizing Bible passages Benjamin had read aloud. The paper trail grows sparse after 1906. Census records from 1910 list Sarah Caldwell living alone. No children are mentioned. Death certificates for the 8 remaining children do not appear in official records, suggesting burial on the property without documentation. Whether they died separately over those 5 years or in collective tragedy remains unknown. Sarah's death certificate, dated July 1913, lists her age as 42 and cause as general debility. She was found by Benjamin's cousins after several days had passed, alone in the dwelling that had housed such improbable life. The county buried her beside Benjamin and their children in graves that received no markers beyond wooden crosses that weather eventually destroyed. The medical papers documenting the Caldwell family gathered dust in academic archives. The case that had sparked such controversy faded into obscurity, remembered only by those directly involved and forgotten by the broader medical establishment. Decades passed before medical historians rediscovered the archived materials. A researcher found Garrett's papers in the Louisville Medical Archives in 1962. Modern genetic analysis applied retrospectively confirmed the family's tragedy. Represented extraordinarily bad genetic fortune rather than inevitable consequence. The probability of two individuals with such severe separate conditions meeting, marrying, and reproducing was vanishingly small. When the Historical Society placed a marker at the unmarked burial site in 1983, the simple granite stone bore only names and dates. No medical terminology appeared, just a community's belated acknowledgement that these had been people whose lives mattered beyond their contribution to scientific understanding. In medical archives, the documents remain, now digitized and accessible worldwide. They continue contributing to understanding of genetic inheritance and medical ethics. But anyone examining those materials encounters not just scientific data, but faces of real children who smiled despite pain, a mother who refused to abandon them, and a father who taught them to read while unable to stand. If this story moved you or made you think differently about medical history and human dignity, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What struck you most about this family's story? I read every comment and appreciate you being here for these deep dives into forgotten history.